Hey, this is Bryson. Thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel, Jack of Trades. In this video, I am going to cover my Mugen Bulldog II, some parts that I recently picked up in an eBay lot, and other parts that I'm going to use to do a rebuild on this car. Basically to bring it from this state to a very nice restored condition. The Mugen Bulldog II is an interesting car. It came out back in 1986. And when you think about kind of what else was out in the mid-80s, I think they were ahead of their time as far as the technology and the design of their vehicles. And they were doing everything, almost everything differently than everyone else. And I'll get into that as we flip the camera around and get a closer look at this car. All right, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at the car now. Getting right into it, this is my Mugen Bulldog II, released in 1986. The original Bulldog had a roll cage, not a body, and featured metal brackets around the front and rear of the vehicle to support that roll cage, as well as create kind of a bumper effect. What's unique about this car, as I said earlier, is that I feel like they're kind of ahead of their time in the technology that they're putting into the cars. And they were doing everything different than everyone else. So what we see here is a typical mechanical speed controller, very similar to what we would see in the Tamiya style, with the wiper arm here, and then the resistor pack back here. And that's about the only similarity we're going to see, that and the four wheels. So as we can see in the front and rear, we have these monoshocks, but they're not just regular shocks. These are called air shocks. So with these air shocks, if I had to guess how they worked, I sketched a diagram, but basically you have a piston inside. So it's a sealed cylinder with a piston, and that piston has what I would call a U-cup seal. And the way that it works is as the shaft goes out, this seal is allowed to wipe up along the body, the cylinder wall. And it allows air to flow past the seal to fill that volume. And then when the shaft is pushed in, that seal expands and it seals up against the body of the cylinder and the piston, and it prevents this air in here from escaping. And so basically you're compressing that air, and the air acts like a spring. That's the only way I can imagine this working, and working over the last, well, 35 years, since this car is 37 years old right now. So for something to last that long, it would have to be, you couldn't have a pressurized system because the air would leak out over time. So you have to have something that kind of regenerates with each stroke. I believe that's probably how this works. I think these look like they are actually not serviceable, so I'm just guessing without actually taking one apart. You can hear them wheezing, so you're probably getting some blowback past that seal, but we still get a springy effect. And actually, the car is not, I mean, it's a little stiff, right? We don't have a battery in the car, but it's functional for a 37-year-old car. So what else is cool about this car? Well, it has four-wheel steering. This is my first four-wheel steering car that I have, where obviously you got more steering in the front than the rear. But here's your steering servo. You've got a linkage going to bell cranks, as you would typically see, except this is straddling the main chassis / gearbox. Then you have another link going back here to another bell crank with, I guess it has similar geometry. Oh no, I see. We have a much smaller lever arm here than we do here, so we're getting probably a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio on the front to rear steering. And why are we not even turning there? Anyways, as you can see, this car is very dirty, but it's not really abused. If you look at it, there's no broken parts on it. There's very minimal wear on the arms. The lower plate actually looks like it's in almost mint condition. There you see some scuffing on the bottom of the gearbox. This gearbox is actually really unique. So it's a belt drive transmission where you have your motor here. So that means you've got a pinion gear, then you've got a spur gear here, and then there's a belt going to the front differential and a belt going to the rear differential, and this assembly here is actually a differential as well. I believe the front and rears are gear diffs, and then this middle one is a ball diff. But that's unconfirmed. That's just what I'm guessing. What else is kind of cool? The chassis is cool. So it's basically it's a vertical plate chassis where you have this kind of webbing that makes up the gearbox slash chassis, and that's sandwiched between these two aluminum plates. So that makes for a very rigid chassis. And there's not much. This pan here is mostly cosmetic and to help keep dirt off of things, but it doesn't do much. It's very flimsy. Kind of true to the era. You see kind of a cheesy mounting scheme for the servos. Here they have these nice metal brackets so you can feed zip ties into it, and then they just hold these servos in place with zip ties. If I had to redo this, I would probably make proper servo brackets. And I'll get into that in a little bit. The one thing this car was missing when I got it was a proper front bumper. So this is not the original bumper. It's either a homemade job or an aftermarket, but it doesn't utilize this, I don't know, for lack of a better term, this bulkhead. You can see on the rear how we have this lower rear skid plate that couples to this upper bulkhead plate, and that makes for a nice solid assembly. We don't get that in the front. The bumper is detached from that bulkhead. So I guess the bumper has some flex to it, which is a good thing, and it's a durable bumper, but it puts a lot of stress on that bulkhead, and you can kind of see it flexing there as you hit the bumper. And then, of course, this car had front and rear sway bars, in addition to the four-wheel steering. It's four-wheel drive, obviously. That's about it. The battery strap system's pretty interesting. It uses this, it's almost like a brass or copper, not copper, but probably a brass sheet metal strip. So you can see in there's a little brass sheet metal strip in there, and then there's a rod that is clamped to that sheet metal, and then there's a tightening screw on the bottom here. So you basically loosen that screw. To loosen that strap, you slide your stick pack in there, and then you tighten this screw to clamp it down. That's actually probably not too bad. It's pretty clever, and all it would take is, you know, a couple of turns of that screw to loosen your pack, slide it out, throw in a new one, and tighten it back down. So it makes for fast battery changes, I think. I would guess. I'm just guessing. Obviously the tires are rotted on this. You know what's interesting about cars, I've seen this on several cars kind of from this era, is that the wheels don't really have beads on them for the tires to register on. The wheels are just smooth cylinders, and the tires are, so with that design you rely heavily on the glue holding the tire to the wheel. If you don't glue your tires on, they slide off. The way these tires are attached to the wheels is not typical for most RC cars. Even back in the mid 80s, Team Associated was, you know, they had three-piece wheels where you were pinching those tires to the wheels very securely, without having to necessarily glue them. So I don't know. It's a simple wheel design, but if you're molding a part, it's not that hard to throw on beads for the tires and wheels, unless there's kind of a form factor that you're trying to match with other manufacturers. Then you wouldn't necessarily want to stir the pot in that sense. What else? Dog bone drive shafts. It uses it doesn't use C-hubs, it uses pivot balls on the steering uprights.
versus like a C-hub spindle assembly. So it's a simpler design, but it's a cool car, and it doesn't look like much, but it's pretty dirty, but I think it'll clean up well. And if we get into the parts that I have for this car, here's the little antenna mast. I assume that goes there, maybe? I don't know. The body's pretty beat up, and that's where we get into what are we going to do to restore this car. After I picked up this car, I went ahead and picked up a body, so I've got a Team Blue Groove body for it. And then I picked up this G10 lower chassis plate, or skid plate, from Factory Works. This is a partial incomplete kit that I picked up from a recent eBay purchase. That was the one where I had bought that early Edinger RC10. And this is the one where it was missing quite a few of the parts that were advertised in the photos in the lot. But that being said, I believe that I do have enough parts to basically bring this Bulldog back up to an almost mint condition. And I'll kind of go over what I have and what I don't have. And what I don't have, I don't think I necessarily need at the moment. So here we see a partial blister pack with the motor, pinion gear, the air shocks, and the mid differential. These are good parts to have. I imagine the motor on here is obviously kind of rusty, but it's a silver can, so it's not like we couldn't put something else in there, but it's nice to have an original motor. And then we get into the other parts. And I'll go ahead and do a montage after this, just to kind of showcase everything. So we got an original decal sheet, which is in good shape. We don't see too much, actually any peeling on the corners, so I could use all these stickers. These are the shock stickers, and we have a bunch of body stickers. So this is a good thing to have. We have a new skid plate. And we've got a new set of tires. This is key because these tires are probably, well, pretty much all Bulldog stuff is impossible to find. There's not a lot of these parts out there. I'd been sitting on this car for a while and I never saw a bumper come up on eBay. So we have a complete set of tires. We've got a new speed controller. Sealed. These are kit bags, and they're basically, these bags are sealed still. We've got that missing bumper. That's a great piece to have. It's a pretty flimsy bumper. I don't know if I would really want to run it, but it's good to have to build possibly a shelf queen. Some miscellaneous hardware. This is that kind of middle webbing for that chassis plate. You can see it's very flimsy. There's not a whole lot going on with it, but once you put those side plates on, it makes for a very rigid box beam or torsion box structure. I think what I might do just to kind of bling it up a little bit is make some carbon fiber plates. So I'm not going for box stock rebuild. I think I'm going to, though I probably could because I have enough parts, but I think this is a great opportunity to do something cool, and making carbon fiber side plates I think would be awesome. I think it would look pretty trick. And it's a non-permanent upgrade. I can always go back to the aluminum if I wanted to. And the aluminum in general is easy to clean up, so even though that auction advertised, actually looking at those photos, it looked like there was kind of an incomplete new kit and then part of a incomplete used kit, because they had some pieces of this that were broken off, it looked like. And then as I look at these differentials, these actually look used. So I suspect some of these parts are new, some are used. But we have front and rear diffs if we ever need backups. And then more importantly, we've got a complete set of upper and lower front and rear arms. And they look identical actually. So that's a big thing to have as well. These arms will really kind of set off that car. So I think I have all the parts that are kind of cosmetic. Here's that rear lower skid plate. So we got a new one of those. We've got front and rear bulkheads. Again, these are Mugen heavily leveraged reusing parts, so these are identical in design. They get used both in the front and the rear of the vehicle. You can almost take this car and flip it around and just change the linkage and drive it. You know, it can drive forward or backwards, and you could simply change the geometry of the steering with this bell crank, this servo arm. Your weight distribution would be a little weird, but you could do the cab forward design on the car, right? You can see here how this this kind of webbing is buckled in a little bit from the aluminum side plates, and that's just the design of this part. Here it's actually, it looks like it's straight, so when it gets bolted up it might actually be flush. And then we've got, let's see here, we've got three, so we don't have a complete set of these, but we've got three of these steering knuckles, not three, unfortunately. That's fine. And then here's that battery strap that I was telling you about. It's this little copper, or not, I keep calling it copper, but I think it's brass. And there's a little aluminum pin that gets clamped to that brass strip, and then you cinch that down to hold the battery in place. And we got just some miscellaneous this is an empty bag. These look like out drives for the differential as well as the spindles. Some bushings, brass bushings. So even though our differentials are used, we have the out drives which you could replace with new ones. We got the front and rear sway bars and the little antenna mast. And then just some more hardware bags. So, all in all, we have quite a bit here to, we have everything we need to rebuild this car into a more respectable state. So that was the intent and the goal of getting that lot, and I think we can still achieve that. We're just short on a couple of parts. Otherwise, we probably maybe could have come close to building a complete car. We're obviously missing, I think the big thing that we're missing are wheels, and these wheels actually don't look too bad. We'll have to unglue them and maybe polish them up, but otherwise I think they're in pretty good shape. There's not any huge gouges. They're obviously yellowed. I have some new plastic treatment that I want to try that basically, I don't know if it's a bleach, but it changes it for plastics that have yellowed. It clears them up or cleans them up. All right, so I'll go ahead and do a photo montage of all the parts, and then we'll close it out.